Austin Adams, welcome to Validated.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, this is a fun episode. This is a weird episode. We're not quite sure where this is going to go yet, but we'll find out together.
Yeah. I mean, what could go wrong? Two Austins.
What could go wrong? Austin on Austin crime. So I'm excited to have you here because there's a whole bunch of stuff we've been like DMing back and forth about for, I think, feels like years at this point. You are one of those people who I think does a very good job of understanding what's going on in crypto without falling prey to the narrative and falling prey to the hype and the marketing and actually focusing on things that are true to what you think matter in the space. At the same time, you're doing this from a very different sort of headspace and geographical space than most people in the industry. And there's components of this that I think really fulfill what was sort of the Web 2 promise and never became the Web 2 reality of how software and software development can be an economic driver for areas that are not big cities, are not, East Coast, West Coast, or not, London, but are places all throughout the world where people can live and are also not like vacation destination cities, right? I think there's a movement right now in crypto to say, I'm leaving the United States and I'm going to somewhere like Costa Rica. I'm going to somewhere like Dubai. These places that are well understood to be still quite wealthy expat communities that are, just nice places to live, but are not necessarily different from a homogeny perspective than the places many of these people are leaving. So that's our setup for the conversation today, and we'll see how it goes.
Awesome. Excited.
So I want to start off just for folks who are not familiar. I think OG devs are going to recognize you from your Metaplex days and from some of the work you did back then. But walk me through a little bit of your history pre-blockchain and then how you got involved in Solana and other ecosystems.
Yeah. Got my CS degree at a tiny college in the mountains of Colorado. Great place. The one of the creators of Haskell, who was I don't know why he was at that school. He loved to rock climb. He was some bigwig from Princeton or whatever, but decided to go to that school. He was our main professor because it was a very small program. So I got to learn a lot from there. I was a functional programming maxi for a while, and realized, maybe that's not it. That's about as cool as like the chain that went to the wallet from the front pocket was. And then, I dove in. I ran my own businesses for a while, doing a lot of like web agency type of stuff and like local business solutions for web and IT. And then decided that I was done running my own business and paying for all of the things myself and doing all my tax complications. And I got a job in financial stuff. So I was building underwriting systems. I was building like alternative finance systems, which was kind of fun and interesting. Then I took a detour into IoT. And this was a company that was like just attaching buzzwords to itself. Like no joke. I didn't know this at the time, of course. And then as I got into it, it was like, oh, this whole like blockchain thing, we don't really need it. I had been diving into some of the like Bitcoin stuff back earlier in the day. I never bought any because I was like kind of dumb at the time. Probably still dumb, but anyway, so I even though I was so resisting it from like the practical, pragmatic, like let's actually get this thing to market perspective, I was still very interested in how like my first real take into like jumping into how blockchain or distributed ledger technology, which is a term you don't hear anymore, distributed ledger. This is back in the Hyperledger days, all their projects. This was pre-Solana, but I started diving into those different things and I don't know, I just became fascinated with this idea of like censorship resistance and like verifiable computation and then like cryptography. Like I never did any hardcore math, but it's become kind of like I like to say I'm an armchair cryptographer because I'm like completely LARPing on all of this stuff, but I love to learn it and I love to understand it. So how I got into Solana was I was working, I went back, I left that company, went into like stock market stuff, Um, and I was frankly just super bored at my job because it was like, this was the kind of place that you trip over the bar. Like, if you barely try, you're doing like way better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And so I built a lot of cool stuff and we were having fun, me and my team. Fun fact, I never actually met my boss in person. I was completely remote. I met very few people in person at that company, which was kind of funny. So it's kind of a topic for today. And then I was like, okay, I want to do something. I heard about this cool new blockchain called Solana. All the other blockchains I've tried are like, it's like you're coming from a place where like you're talking about millisecond, nanosecond latency, like on stock market stuff. And then you go use Ethereum and other things, and you're like, what? This is so slow. And so then I started playing around with Solana, told all my friends, like, this is something special about this. Yeah. So I just became even more fascinated just looking into it. I didn't know anything about the Solana development model, but I just decided I'm really bored at my job. All the Solana that I had bought was doing really well. All my crypto was doing really well. I don't need to work at this company. So I decided to join Metaplex and was excited about, hey, can we use NFTs for like a ton of stuff to represent a ton of business things on chain to create like more efficient financial systems, like business interop, like things like that. And then turns out people just wanted garbage art at Metaplex. So
Well, it's funny. I actually just had Steven on, and that vision that you're sort of talking about actually is something that is like a real component of Core and sort of the new versions that they've been launching since then. So it's it's a long journey for a lot of these things to come to true fruition, but it's very cool to see that still moving on the pipeline.
Yeah, all jokes aside, like I think we're actually seeing that especially on Solana. We're actually seeing that, especially like shout out to Underdog and Metaplex and others for pushing that forward. And yeah, I'd like to think that I helped us along with many others, helped us get to the point where we saw NFTs as more than just Ponzi-nomic things. And definitely we have a great suite of tools to do it on Solana. And I think best in the world. So
yeah, I think that's a very true statement. So, you mentioned before that when you're working for this financial technology company in the stock market, that you were fully remote. Where in the world were you based at that time?
Yeah, based in the hill country of Texas. We're probably a couple hours outside of Austin and an hour or so outside of San Antonio. So it's a area like around Boerne, Texas.
Yeah. And where'd you grow up?
I grew up all over the place. I'd say mainly in Colorado.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we moved a lot due to, parents' jobs and stuff.
Yeah. And so, you're in a different location than I think a lot of people would assume you are for saying that, I was one of the core devs on Metaplex. And now you still work in a very technical role, albeit attached to something that's, I'm not sure how we'd exactly describe Anagram. Not quite a VC firm, not quite a product studio.
I have the exact description if you want to.
Yeah. Let's get the exact description.
Anagram is a holding company that invests in human as well as financial capital, building and investing products that advance the adoption of blockchain and Solana.
So, what you're talking about is like living in a part of the United States that is not usually associated with cutting edge software, let alone cutting edge blockchain technology.
Right.
One of the things that I think is interesting about crypto, and this was sort of the Web 2 promise, right? The idea of the Web 2 was we are going to have computers that were connected to the internet. We're going to build applications on them, and those things are going to make a lot of money, and they're going to support developers anywhere in the world working on these types of technologies. And really what we've found is there's two cities that still dominate tech today. It's, the Bay Area, let's call it San Francisco, and it's New York City. And there's some stuff going on in and around that, right? But Redmond is its own thing, right? But again, these are big cities on the West Coast. These are big cities on the East Coast. These are sort of like, you'd call them like pressure cookers for ideas, right? And what we have is we have a system where there's a lot of software work that gets done outside of the United States. There's a lot of this work that gets done in other places. but it's usually either US companies outsourcing or it is companies that have been founded in other countries serving their local market through their local developers. And that was not really the promise, right? The whole thing of the internet was it was going to mean that anyone with an internet connection can be just as economically productive no matter where you are in the world. Fast forward to blockchain, and I think what we've seen is that that is opening up more, right? It's easier to be a top tier contributor and not live in a top tier market, in part because there's so many fewer developers needed to actually make something happen. But I'm kind of curious what your experience with that is, because there's no reason New York City and San Francisco should still be the capitals of blockchain, but they are. And I think a lot of that is the idea pressure cooker of people being around here. So I'm really curious to dig in a bunch on what is your experience doing very cutting edge work, but not sort of necessarily having that IRL developer social fabric around you each day.
I think it's something I don't often take time to kind of consider, but I think, in like kind of thinking about this time on the podcast, just was kind of considering that I think I do have to work harder to maintain good working relationships with folks. And I think that's true of all remote folks. So I think that's kind of like what you would expect to say. But I also think that blockchain, it's funny because we're more okay with an anon, completely faceless, nameless person contributing to something because we have a lot more technology built in to that. If that person is malicious or whatever, or is not malicious, like we're probably okay. I mean, we still have a lot of stuff to work through on all that, but so I think that contributes to it. But also, I think that my experience is that I have to be knowable through video, right? I have to be, and I think I'm pretty personable, and I think I have to really work hard to ensure that people can get to know me just over this. Like I've met a lot of my colleagues over the years because I and they have prioritized like getting together in person, which I think is important. But I think you do have to, like, if you want to really succeed and like make an impact in people's lives, because I'm all about like, the crypto is one thing that's awesome, but the most important thing to me is like, the people that I've mentored in the space, like I don't just like try to mentor them in their crypto and in their programming, but it's about life. Like this whole thing is about us enjoying life and trying to set things up for the next stage of humans, and so I think that can't be lost if you're trying to make an impact and you want to be remote, is that you have to invest in the other people, not just like the technology. Because, it's a lot easier to do that because you can just go hang out with someone. But I find myself getting a lot on calls and just like helping people through career moves and asking people for advice on career moves or things like that. And so I think the sum of that is just, you need to work harder to maintain relationships, and you need to prioritize those, even sometimes over the technology.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that choice for you to say that, this is going to be a little harder. I'm going to have to work at things a little bit differently, but the other parts of my life are more complete or more fulfilling because of, in large part, it sounds like just from our conversations, where and how you've chosen to live your life.
Yeah. I think that I don't actually see it necessarily as harder. Like maybe from the outside looking in, it seems harder. But like, when you're in the thick of things, you don't really think through like, hey, this is the pain that I'm feeling. But if I had to say like, the choice is really like just my family structure and the choices that we've made because of how my wife was raised or how we want to raise our kids. It's like, hey, this makes a lot of sense for us. I used to love cities, especially when I was single or didn't have kids. And I still really enjoy going to New York or Chicago or the Bay Area. Like, I enjoyed it for a time. And then maybe I'm just old and grumpy now. I'm kind of like, I don't want to deal with all this traffic and noise and, whatever. But, like, I don't often think about it, but I do love the fact that, hey, where I live, I can just walk outside and my son is like putting together some fort out of just garbage he found in our
Yeah.
sheds and blah, blah, blah. And that's cool. And that's something some kids might miss out on, but of course he might miss out on other things. And it's a balance. But I think like the things that I have to work harder at, or maybe I miss out on with this, is like really the hackathons and the conferences and things like that, because it becomes a little, I think, mentally harder to be like, yeah, I'm going to leave my family for a couple of weeks, or I'm going to take my family with me. And that's a whole other bag of complexity to go to this hackathon or to go to this conference or whatever. Even though I'm only a couple hours away from Austin, like I really could just go do a day trip. But you kind of get into your head, like, I'm doing fine on video calls. I can do this. But anytime I do meet up in person with folks, it's really rewarding, especially if you're kicking off a project. So the choice is like, we want to be more connected to nature. We love farming. We love, not farming, like we run a hobby farm. We love like our garden and we raise animals and different things like that. And so we really love that aspect of life. And so I guess for me, it's like worth it. Like I can go, I'm struggling through some problem. I go hop on my tractor and move some dirt for a little while. And then I'm like, oh, I got it.
So I think the thing you're describing is a pretty common experience for a lot of people. They are single, they live in cities, they get married. At some point, they decide, hey, we want to have kids, and they might be quite wealthy, but they still can't afford, a townhouse in somewhere like New York. And so they move out of the city. But they usually move to Long Island or New Jersey or, upstate in Connecticut, something like that. They don't necessarily do what you've done, which is actually move quite far outside of a city to actually, have a hobby farm, as you're talking about. So that to me feels like actually a pretty different choice in how you want to raise your kids, how you want to live your life. Talk to me a little bit about that. And also sort of, you mentioned before how your wife was raised. How was she raised? How's that moved into how you guys want to live your life?
Yeah. I was raised in cities, right?
Yeah.
Downtown Denver, downtown LA, even in our married life, we lived in the Bay Area of California for a while, like most tech people. But my wife was raised in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, farm life, very, and I'm not saying people in cities are not connected to each other, but I do think there's a different dynamic between community and cities. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm saying it's just different, like neighbors and farm town, USA, it's very different.
Yeah.
And I think at least at that spot in Colorado and maybe these places in Texas, it's a, you're all kind of watching out for each other, but it's a different type of like, watching out for each other. But you depend on the land because it produces things for you. You depend on your neighbors because they produce things for you. They depend on you because maybe you're their egg supplier or their milk supplier or whatever it might be. And so it's an interesting system that maybe one day will disrupt the cash and have a farm coin. And people have already done that. But so that's how she was raised. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely a different choice. People move to Long Island or different places like that. So for us, I think it's, helping fulfill some of those dreams that she's had and now dreams that I have been sort of somehow infected by.
Yeah.
I also think that, and this is maybe the meat of it, is that, and I don't think this is so uncommon. I've met many technology people who've had a while to simmer in the technology melting pot. It's maybe not when people are very young in their technology careers, but like, I think for me and for many other, I guess, graybeards in technology, there's almost this like, I want to have part of my life that is free of technology.
Yeah.
I want to have part of my life that doesn't require a pull request or doesn't require some long compile time. And so it is interesting that on days that I'm, LARPing as a ZK cryptographer and trying to write interesting, what would be called high tech stuff, I'm also like out there moving bags of feed with my tractor. And I like that. I like the dichotomy and I like the the difference.
Yeah.
I'm not really like a doomsday person. I don't think it's going to all come crashing down. I joke about that. But I also do think maybe on a practical level, being able to have eggs in multiple baskets is good. But I think it's mainly there's something cathartic about, committing code and then going into my wood shop and building a piece of furniture type of thing.
Yeah, it's funny to hear you kind of talk about it that way, because one of the things I was thinking while you were talking about this is, you're saying about how there's parts of your life you don't want to be as involved with technology in, but then you're also going out and getting on a tractor, which is objectively technology.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's just relatively different, right?
Yeah.
That's a good thing to point out.
Well, it's like, I have friends in New York who will sort of be like, oh, I'm doing like a no technology weekend. And they'll get on the subway and they'll go somewhere, right? And it's always so interesting that, like, I think this critique of like, what is technology and what has technology done to us, there's a very interesting subset of that I haven't really been able to tease out, because there's certain types of technology that are non-intrusive and can actually be helpful, right?
Right.
And I'm not even talking about the technology of like, well, like your wood shop is also technology. Like we'll set that aside, because like, that's sort of like defining
some of it's
technology. Right. Some of it's not. Some of it's just a big hammer.
Yeah, some of it's a file and all this random stuff. Yeah,
totally.
Exactly.
But I think there's something very interesting about like, what is technology that feels like it demands things of us, and what is technology that we can demand things of?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down, like on a practical level, chat apps, man. Like always being in touch.
Yeah.
It's nice to. It's funny because when I hop on my tractor, I'm also got my phone and I'm listening to an audiobook.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of a thing. So it's probably not so much like getting away from technology, but it's getting away from possibly like the demands on my mental focus of technology, or, being constantly in communication with other people. But I agree with you. Also, I think people think something is technology if it's more recent versus something that has been, created in the past. That's no longer technology. That's just sort of like part of the world now.
It's almost nature at this point.
Yeah. My tractor is nature.
Yeah.
Tell that to lots of folks. They will disagree, especially because it's a diesel tractor.
Yes. Yeah. I'm really curious for your experience of sort of living out in these areas, because, there is this sort of idea of like a real loneliness epidemic and crisis. And it's not just in the United States. It exists in many places. And there's a lot of evidence that it isn't necessarily any better in cities than it is living out in, as you'd say, sort of the middle of nowhere. So I'm kind of curious what your experience has been, what your sort of social fabric is like, and how that compared to when you lived, downtown in San Francisco.
That's a great question. I think we're hitting on the value of having a good community. And I think you can do that in cities, or you can not do that in cities. And you can do that in suburbia, and you cannot do that in suburbia. And definitely you can do that when your property literally is like miles and miles and miles away from the nearest fence, even. And so I think it fundamentally comes down to like, you choose to have community, or you choose not to. And I mean, I'm sure it's not as simple as that for some people. But I think maybe for the majority of people, it's like, do you want community? Because community can get messy. Like if you invite people into your lives, like the best thing is to be able to disagree with a friend and even let it get heated.
Yeah.
And then you guys are fine still, because it's not like everyone has to agree with you or whatever, especially about political stuff. Like that's just a whole bag of things. But
do you find that easier out there or harder?
I don't know. I think it depends on the people in your community.
I was talking to a friend who has gone through sort of the experience of having like a mob out for him, an internet mob out for him before.
Oh, yes.
And, one of the things he was talking about is that there's a lot of people today that when you interact with them, it almost feels like they're doing Twitter. Like there's something about the
like
sort of
in real life, they're just like twittering.
Yeah, like the way that they're talking about things feels like they're performing for an imagined audience.
Yeah.
and that he was sort of thinking about how a lot of this is relating to how personal relationships become like extra polarized, and extra meaning like external polarization to the actual relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you find that out there, or if the physical space also brings mental space.
I would say that in the community that I'm in, and like there's varying stages of community. Like,
Yeah.
I think it does depend on maybe the layer and the stage of the relationship. Because none of my like very, very small amount of my local community even knows what crypto Twitter is. Actually, a few people do, which is great. We get to jam on some of that. Um, but most of them are not. And so the typical things apply, which is you want people to like you and you put your best face forward. But I would say that's when you really get to know someone. And I think maybe the definition of like you're actually someone's friend is when you actually can push through that layer
Yeah.
and like just see who someone is and like find, like we have a saying, like I'm a Christian and part of my community is like the Christian church around me, and like we have a saying, it's like find the gold in people, like look at who they are, and it doesn't matter, you might not like everything about everyone, but like you find what about them is amazing and try to encourage that to the person, right? And like I think when you're out there doing stuff like that, you can see a lot of what people think are their own failures, right? And as you encourage them and you break through that level, like I think people start to see like, oh, they don't have to pretend in front of you anymore. And I mean, I'm sure I do that to other people too, especially when you first get to know them.
Yeah.
But going back to your question of like the loneliness in rural areas, I think that I was lonelier, or my wife and I were lonelier in the Bay Area than actually out here. And I think the only reason for that was busyness.
Yeah.
Families, it becomes harder, believe it or not, kids, boys and girls out there, it becomes harder when you have a family to like, it's like momentum. It becomes harder to steer the ship toward another ship. Everyone's got to turn and meet on a certain day. And so I just felt that out in the Bay Area, people's schedules were so full that it was so much harder to like form a community around each other, you know?
Yeah.
I had plenty of single friends and they had no problem. They'd just come over, you know, and like, no big deal. Oh, let's hang out. I love to hang out. Oh, free meal. Great. I love that. Out here, I'd say it's a little bit different, not because people are less busy, but I think there's a little bit more of a just, hey, drop by kind of culture, and people are willing to like shoot the breeze with you, and people are late stuff. And that's probably why. And that's okay, you know, because they were late because literally they just like stopped on the side of the road because they saw someone was stopped and they chatted with them for 30 minutes. It's like very interesting kind of stuff, like especially having part of my life in LA where it's like, no, you're not talking to anybody, you know, like you're just moving forward. And I mean, LA is probably different now. This was a different time. Like, I just remember when we moved from LA to Colorado and my parents were like talking to people in the grocery store. We're like, what is happening? Like when usually we just kind of like put our heads down, we get stuff done. But, and I think like in the Bay Area, just on the loneliness aspect, it was like that. But I would say on the flip side here, you know, and I've already mentioned this, I miss out, and this is intentional. I don't go to as many builder events, right? And so I'm usually needing to catch up from the folks that have gone to those things. And like, you know, the alpha is usually fed to me through the grapevine instead of being there in the moment, which I think that will take a conscious choice for me to be like, okay, I'm going to go to these things. Yeah. And I think that would be positive. But at the same time, it's like I said, you have to overcome that mental, like, oh, I need to do all these things to be able to get there.
Yeah. You know, it's something I've thought a lot about because there's sort of this like, so I live in a 330 unit building in Brooklyn. And I have a few friends in the building that I've met but I've thought a lot about why there isn't a stronger community. Most of us own in the building. It's not a transient renter building or something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But there isn't sort of this idea of like, yeah, you say hi to people, but like there's only a few people I've become like actually close to, even though I've been on, no joke, 5 calls with crypto people and we realize we live in the same building.
That's awesome.
Yes. But even with that,
Well, I mean, they were probably ETH maxis. No, I'm just joking. Just joking. Love you guys out there.
but even in that sort of a situation, like there is not really that much community that's formed in this building, in part because, so maybe take a step back. About 5 years ago, my mom remarried and moved out to Livingston, Montana, which is, I think, about 8,000 people. And there are 2.5 times more people in Brooklyn than there are in the state of Montana. That's just Brooklyn, not even the rest of New York City. That's just one borough.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's this interesting component, which is almost like you're paralyzed by choice. Like there are so many people you could talk to, so many people you could date, so many people you could be friends with, that it's sort of like each interaction doesn't have any sort of power around it in the same way, unless you already know the person. What they were describing is just like they're friends with lots of people now who they never would have been friends with before. And there's some friends that they don't even actually necessarily like that much, but they're friends with them. And that's a very new experience for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have a whole lot to say on that. I think there's probably some sociological studies on all this.
Yeah.
I will say that on the flip side, the like Friends, the show Friends, right? It's like, did it used to be that way? It seems like maybe technology, like this is probably a trope, but like maybe technology played a part in people not communicating as much in their building, or maybe it didn't. Who knows?
Right.
That's something for the sociologists and at some point anthropologists to look into.
Because I also have plenty of friends who have like text groups with everyone who lives in their building and like have a very strong community that's built up. But like it's always been interesting to me, like what is you almost need like 1 or 2 ambassador people that then just like bring everyone together. And maybe that's easier to find when there's actually fewer people around.
Yeah, it could be. And I think maybe in my area, like a lot of neighborhoods start to get to know each other because of their dogs. It's really funny.
Yeah.
But like in my neighborhood, it's always about, hey, whose dog is out, like whose dog is roaming. And then, you're going and chasing your dog and then the neighbor comes to the fence and then you just made a lifelong friend.
Yeah.
It's like, it's very interesting. So, the dog lovers, I'm sure cats work the same way for you. They're awesome, but just anyways.
I have no idea where this thought is from, but it's not mine. That's the only disclaimer I got.
Okay.
But they were talking about how we have so overscheduled and overprogrammed our lives, but at the same time we place such a premium on leisure. But all of our it's almost like that sort of Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week. Figure out like how you can optimize and get all of your work super efficient and super well done, and then it's like Netflix. Right. And there's this real dichotomy in the way that we perceive the way we should be performing and acting at work versus the value we place upon that actual leisure time. And that's always stayed with me as something that feels like there's a real dichotomy there about this might be also uniquely American because we statistically work so much more than other countries.
Right.
And it's not just because, of money. Like the richer you are, the more hours you work. And I always thought that's a very interesting stat.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to live in Mexico, and in that culture, or at least in that part of the northern Mexico, someone was pointing out all these houses. He was like, "See those people? They're rich. See those people? They're richer." And what you notice is like those people's fence is this high. Those people's fence is this high. It's like when you have more to lose. I guess if you have a lot of wealth, you have more to. And I don't know if it's necessarily true about everybody, but it's a good kind of observation that we work a ton. And I would say like I have to do that. You know, coming back to like living out in the world, working from home. Like there are weeks I don't ever leave the house, which is weird. But I talk with people all over the world. Like I'll be on a call with someone from Israel, India, Switzerland, all over the world. But like I will have not left my house that entire week.
Yeah.
It's like, what? Like for zero reasons, I would have left my house.
Yeah.
I will have talked to a bunch of people. People will have come over. We have people over all the time, but it's kind of interesting. And so what that also means is I have to figure out the balance of work, you know?
Right.
And I think there's, you know, some part of it is like, I have to catch up a little bit from the people that are always working and always in the hacker houses and stuff. And that's something I've had to kind of come to terms with, is like, you know what, my place in the ecosystem now, it's coming back to Solana.
Yeah.
I'm going to build some cool stuff. I've got a few things left in me, right? Maybe more than a few, I hope. But also to mentor, to build up and to encourage. And like, it's kind of cool to see the stuff that people are putting out, and like not taking credit or by any means, but saying, getting to know that like I help to inspire those people. And instead of it being like, oh, I need to like grapple with this imposter syndrome or deal with this like victim mindset, or like say I have to compete and catch up because I'm not at the hacker houses, or I missed a break point or whatever, or I live so far from a usable airport, which is real. If you can call the San Antonio International Airport usable, that's a stretch. But anyways, you know, instead of feeling I have to catch up, which I have felt in the past, and that's definitely something that contributes to the burnout or whatever. It's like, no, I can actually focus on someone other than myself, which is obviously hard, you know, to do. And so, anyways,
yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, the thing you talk about there, I think, is really real. Is like there's a lot of people that, well, I see this a lot with younger developers and younger founders. Is like they're almost on a treadmill to just try and keep pace with whatever the latest thought or trend is. And you know, we saw this a lot in 2022, where there'd just be like the same faces you see over and over again at the hacker houses. And it always felt like what they were searching.
Hacker house roadies.
Yeah. And it was like, you know, it was almost like they're searching for something that wasn't a technical solution.
Right.
And it was always unclear exactly what it was. And it would always hamper their work, right? Their products would take longer to ship. They'd be really up to date on what the culture was, but they'd be not actually doing work that they needed to get done. And I'm kind of curious how, and this is hard. This is a hard question too, because you're of course much older than you were when you were living in the cities. But how have you found that or let me ask a more neutral question. Have you found that the way you approach problems is different now that you're less connected to the day in and day out of what your coworkers are, you know, talking about just passively in the office?
Yeah, I think there's something there. I don't know. I think pragmatically, I used to work all night way more often, thinking that just grinding through it, hands on keyboards, amount of time would be the thing that solves it, which usually ended up with like a lot of refactoring later. I mean, I am a coder, I'm a programmer, so this is like the only grid that I have to answer this question. But I guess I have another grid. On another level, like I think we see what we can see in our context. Like for example, like the problems I'm interested in solving now, which is why I'm into ZK and like cryptography and stuff, is, which this might sound super counterintuitive, is like, when will crypto be useful for my blue collar friends? And I mean blue collar in like the absolute most respectful way, right? Like my neighbor who owns a mechanic shop, right? Like we had a crypto chat at one time. He's like, I don't really know what the all about. And I said, 99% of it is scams. but here's some really cool things about it. But I struggled to say, how would this be super useful for your business?
Right.
Or how would this be super useful for your life? And those are the problems that I'm kind of interested in solving. Whereas I'm interested in solving other problems, but whereas when I was in the city, I think I was kind of more surrounded by people that kind of understood, they were in that mindset, and they were, of course, I wasn't really in crypto in the city, but as far as technology and how technology makes your life better, it's like, oh, we need a more efficient notes and task planning app. And, hey, let's get going on this cool new framework and stuff. Those were the most important problems, or make web services faster. Whereas like out here, it's more like, one of some of the biggest problems, how do we upgrade legacy county infrastructure? Like, how do we provide solutions for businesses that aren't SaaS products that sell their data, or are like eventually get them so locked in that they can't change, or are like actually tailored to their business because their business very non-traditional. They sell dirt, or I don't even know. It's like there's no dirt selling SaaS product. I don't know. Maybe there is, but I would say the way I look at problems is different from the coding level, which is I realize the importance of white space. I think there's a lot of books about this. Is like, take a break from the problem, let your brain work on something else. Whereas in the city, just because I was younger, it was like, no, we got to just grind through. We're working all night. We're trying to reach the Bellman curve or whatever of like enough beers to just like code it, but not enough beers to not be able to function or whatever.
Yeah.
For me, it's like enough coffee or not enough coffee or enough beers or whatever. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Although now I'm an old man and beer gives me a headache, so it's like I don't even drink beer anymore. So it's like all the fun things. Anyways.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was probably do with that whatever you want. But that was a tough answer.
No, I think that was good. There's definitely something there in it. I mean, I will say one of the things as I've gotten older, I have started appreciating the concept of appliance computing much more. That the concept that everything is an application that runs on an operating system, that runs on generic hardware, man, that is unattractive. That is like the last thing I want for stuff I'm actually using every day. And I think the first time I really realized this was there was a period where I was doing a bunch of commercial photography work for a company I was working at. This was probably like my third job, like maybe 3 years out of college type of thing. And I was using a Sony digital camera, like a nice high-end professional one. And the images that were coming off of it were fantastic. And I hated this thing because the entire menu button system was like, it was hierarchical menus and software architecture systems that were like clearly designed by a bunch of engineers who wanted there to be a logical layout of how you navigate through the settings menu. And you compare that to something like a Fuji digital camera, which is objectively a worse product from a sensor and technology perspective, but it is actually like a tool to use that lets you create art. And I found that, like, I used to be one of those people that was like, well, what are the best specs? What are the best version? And when I actually ended up going to buy a camera for my own personal usage, I bought a Fuji system because I am a more creative person using it because my interface point is more creative. And this ties back to all these things where I'm thinking about like these businesses like you're talking about. And it's like, do they really need QuickBooks version 2024 for $20 a month? Or would they actually be fine with functionally the same version of the software that was released in 2002 that just had the updated tax fields, and they bought it once and it sits on a computer that maybe hasn't actually needed to be updated since 2006 because it just runs accounting software and that's all that actually matters. But
and if they ever plug it into the internet, it's immediately host.
Totally dead. It's completely dead, right?
Just instant malware. Yeah, totally.
But this is the concept of like appliance computing, which is like not everything actually needs to be with an account and regular software updating and like I don't know, I think there's something very important there. And one of the things that I worry about the blockchain future is we're not actually a virtue of Bitcoin that is often underappreciated is that you can still plug in a client running a miner from 2012 and it'll still work. And it can still communicate and transact on the network. And that's not
Yeah.
something that can be said about almost any other piece of technology from 2012.
Look, I love Solana, but try using like 3 versions ago Solana CLI.
Completely.
I
Zero
mean,
backwards compatibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, part of it is like we have to somehow update some of this infrastructure.
Yeah.
But I also agree there's a time and place for SaaS products, and I think it's a lot of time. But I also think there's I don't know, the business I talk to, I do a little like, I try to help my friends out. They own businesses and try to point them in the right direction. Like sometimes they just want a person to help them out with stuff, And like when you get into like the account manager space with like the SaaS products, like that's harder for the SaaS product to do without it being like really expensive. Like you can get an amazing account manager at Datadog or New Relic, but dude, you're going to pay a ton of money for those products.
Yeah.
Not saying that these companies would need that, but I mean, AI has really helped. Like this guy was like, what would you charge me to build X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, this much. And he's like, oh, that high? I'm like, yeah, but mainly because I don't want to build it, like it'd be like, and I just told him like, you probably do fine cobbling together some chat GPT stuff.
Yeah.
And like, I think for whatever it is, which is it's a SaaS product, but it is something that allows the customer to get almost exactly what they want.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I don't know really where we're at with the point that I'm trying to make, but I think,
No,
here we are.
I think there's something there because one of the things I was learning about years ago was sort of the differences in U.S. manufacturing versus like Japanese manufacturing and German manufacturing. And one of the very big differences was those assembly lines in Germany and Japan, at least at the time, were designed so the workers could make modifications on the equipment. They were designed so that you could have someone who's doing this, they're making the same part or some team is making the same part and they can make small adjustments as they go. And the US factories were all designed as like once a year
Cookie
we
cutter.
come in and we program something, we update it. And, outside of that, we're going to pay people $18 an hour to work on the line. And we don't expect they'll have any ability to contribute to it. And SaaS feels like it's sort of fallen into that trap over the years that we've made these systems impossible to modify, chasing some goal of simplicity that never existed and is not reasonable to attain. And there's something in the way blockchain's designed that actually I think is really strong here because blockchain has that modification ability. You can take code that exists, you can fork it, you can make a small change to it, and you can deploy it based on your needs. And yes, now you are the security maintainer, but you know what? If it's for your personal use, maybe that's okay.
Yeah, it is interesting, diving more into crypto, this idea that you can just fork any contract is fun and it's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's also something where, as someone who's built a ton of protocols and as someone who's like, like it's interesting that you can't run a successful business just on protocol. You probably have to have a token, or you have to have some sort of like registry or walled garden in order to make any revenue. But it still doesn't deter people from like releasing this awesome software out to the world for free. I mean, they might put some weird licenses on it, but they're still releasing some amazing software. Knowing full well they're going to earn respect, and that's it from it.
Yeah.
Which I think is just fascinating.
Yeah. Well,
anyway.
So what would you say to someone who's thinking about leaving a city? What should they be? What did you think was going to be hard that wasn't? And what did you think was going to be not a problem that turned out to be more challenging?
Coming from the Bay Area to Texas, we thought we definitely had some preconceived notions about the area, which a lot of those turned out to be wrong. I mean, anytime you stereotype things, you're usually wrong.
Yeah.
One thing that we thought probably, and was true for a while, and now it's not true, is like, oh, the cost of living is going to be so much lower. And it was for a while. But also when the cost of living goes down, you start to accumulate more stuff. So it's on you to like accumulate less, right? Unless you want it. You want to pay it, it's fine. The other thing that we thought would be, we didn't really realize would be a problem. In California, it's so easy to access good like agricultural products.
Yeah.
Like we're big raw milk, like animal fats type of people. Like we grow a lot of our own stuff. We took for granted the farmers market scene in those areas. Like we were living in Petaluma area, and those have some of the most epic farmers markets around.
Yeah.
Coming to Texas, that is not a scene. You have to work much harder to maintain the sort of dietary stuff that you want, which I would say in this day and age is so important because everyone's got some dietary thing that they're going on, and who knows. But yeah, so that's something like random that I didn't think about. And then the other thing is just like community. Like we thought it would probably be harder to make friends here, for whatever reason, just because it's going to be newer. Like we're going to go into this place, and usually it takes a couple years to find really good friends. But I would say, and having grown up some in the South, it was maybe more my wife's fear than mine. You can get, what's the saying? People are a lot nicer, right? In the sense that they'll stop and talk to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get to know them any faster. It depends on the person. But I think the chances of you like not having a negative psychological reaction to someone that like, for example, just on the streets of New York, by and large, there's a stereotype for you, but by and large, you'll have a higher percentage chance of being like, oh, this person doesn't like have angry eyes at me, so I'm not going to just keep moving. I'm going to like actually stop and talk to them. So that we thought, hey, it's going to take us a while to get a community, but it was pretty fast. We found some really good folks in the community.
Nice.
Also, go somewhere with no state income tax. Just do yourself a favor.
Yeah. Well, Austin.
Austin.
Thank you for coming on Validated.
Yeah, thank you for having me.